Okay, if everyone's ready, if it's okay, I thought it'd be helpful to just talk about it together as a group. Um, so it's like a lot of halacha is where it's not just a simple black and white. This is right. This is wrong. We have two things that are both right that are in conflict with each other, and the question is which takes priority, which takes precedence. So like the first source here we saw from the Rambam. It's from a Gemara. I just thought it'd be easier to because the Rambam sort of summarizes the conclusion of the Gemara. Is that the mitzvah of redeeming captives? He calls it the Gemara calls it a mitzvah rabbah. So Rabba is Gadola in Aramaic. Hishmei Rabba, it should be Hashem's name should be great, Gadola. And so that it's a great mitzvah. It has the highest precedence of all other types of tzedakah. So if a community is deciding how to allocate its funds, and it has an option between redeeming a captive as opposed to other tzedakah causes, redeeming captives comes first. He says they're subject to every type of suffering. They don't have food. They're of hungry and thirsty and naked, and their life is in danger. And so that's why it has precedence. Yet we still see that the Mishnah, the Rabbanan of the Mishnah made a takana not to pay more than the value, not to pay more than their value because of tikkun olam. So we have to understand. I mean, there's going to be a lot more considerations to take into account. We'll just try to work with one at a time. So we see the Mishnah. It says that there's a takana of tikkun olam, of not to pay more than their value. The Gemara has two possibilities. What does it mean by tikkun olam? What are we worried about? Are we worried about, what was the first possibility, if people remember? Anyone want to say? Poverty, right? So that if, which is what, that the community has to fork up all of its resources, then there's not going to be money left in the community anymore. And what was the second one? Second possibility? Encouraging them to take more. So why? First off the bat, the Gemara is asking. The Mishnah has a rule. So when I say a rule at home, and I say no, there's no more candy today, and my kid asks why not? So generally, what's the motivation behind asking, the reason behind a rule? To get around. So I don't want, not that that's how we want to say what the Gemara is trying to do, but another way of saying, like, when does the reason apply? When does the reason not apply? Right. So if we understand the reason behind, and it's not like that with all halachas, by the way. Some takana, some rules the rabbis made are just blanket. The rule doesn't matter. This is what unique halacha, where the reason actually makes a difference. So that's why the reason is going to make a big difference. So off the bat, if before we even get to what the reason is, would it make a difference to the modern day situation of prisoner swaps? If the problem is impoverishing the community, would we say that a modern day prisoner swap is okay or not okay? It's not impoverishing the community, right? So that's another thing we'll get to later, right? Yeah, you're right. You're right. We'll get to that later. And I have a very interesting anecdote about that, historical footnote about that. But what about the second reason? If the issue is that we're encouraging them to do it again, then that might be a problem, right? Maybe. So there's some who argue maybe even not, because what's the Mishnah talking about? Is the Mishnah talking about where captives want prisoners in exchange, or where they want money? Where they want money, right? So maybe we could make it say differentiate. That's talking where they want money. Maybe it's different when they want prisoners. It could help the answer. It could hurt the answer, and it could go both ways. So we'll see. So the Gemara tries to. I don't want to. I brought the steps in the Gemara. The Gemara tried to bring a proof for one of the answers. It said it's not a good proof. It refuted it. The Gemara came out, didn't answer the question. So we saw it. We'll see in halacha how the question is answered. Before we get there, there's I brought this Gemara in Kesubos. It quotes a brisa, which is another. It's an equivalent authority to the Mishnah. Generally, there's certain rules about who can argue on who. So the period of time of the Tanaim, which is from around 0 CE to about 200 CE, they all have equal authority. So if we have the Gemara is quoting a brisa here from Tanaim, which seem to contradict the Mishnah. So how does it contradict? Because we have two opinions here. The first opinion is that if a woman's taken as a captive and her captors want 10 times her value. The first opinion is what? That he has to, or he doesn't have to, or he's not allowed to. He has to. He has to 10 times. And he says after that, it's up if she's taken again, like that poor guy. I mean, but it's up to him after that. And we have a second opinion in this Mishnah, which is Reb Shimon Gamliel, who says that if they want 10 times her value, then what's the halacha according to Reb Shimon Gamliel in that case? In the second opinion, no, he's not allowed to. So you have an argument there. So Tosfos picks up these. How would we see? Would we say that this fits with the Mishnah and Gittin or not? At least the first opinion. No, because what does the Mishnah and Gittin say? You pay too much or you can't pay too much? Can't pay too much. So how come we have an opinion here that if they want 10 times, that he has to pay? Right? It seems like a contradiction, right? So one way of resolving that would say, okay, it's two different opinions, right? There's generally when there's two brises that seem two Tanaim that seem to argue, you can either say that it's two opinions, or we could try to fit them together. So generally the approach is trying to fit them together. We want to try to avoid arguments. And it's not just that there might be an exception, but that also the way Rav Lopiansky explains, well, it's not just that something's an exception, but we're getting a more clear picture of the halacha itself. And we understand when it doesn't apply, then we understand more of the essence of the halacha. So that's where Tosfos resolves it here. And do people remember, how did Tosfos resolve this contradiction between the two Gemaras? Why is a wife different? Ishto kagufo. So Tosfos wants to say that the Rabbanon, when the rabbis made this rule in the Mishnah, they never prohibited a person from giving whatever he can for himself. They never prohibited a person from paying for himself, and that extends to a person's wife. So we think, when two people get married, they're like one, and they're like one of the same soul. It's not just a flowery, fluffy idea. It has real halachic ramifications that a person has to pay for his wife because the Rabbanan never prohibited from paying for himself. So that's one exception we see, that a person's wife and for themselves. There's a Gemara later which Tosfos brings. I didn't bring it here, but I just brought in the Tosfos. There's a story of a boy that was redeemed for a lot of money, that he was clearly going to be a leader of the generation. So Tosfos asked about that. How is that allowed? The Mishnah says you can't do it. So what did Tosfos say to answer that? He gave two answers. You want to remember? So why is it different? One was because he was going to be a Talmud Chacham. So clearly he was going to be a Talmud Chacham. The other was that it was the time of Roman destruction. He was being held by the Romans. It was the time of the Churban of the Beis HaMikdash. So there's no concern of that they're going to, if you pay too much, they're going to want to do it again. So what's that svara? What's that logic that the Mishnah wouldn't apply during the time of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash? Why would I say that when the Mishnah, that this rule, this halacha, that we don't want to pay too much because they're going to want to capture more, when there's a destruction and there's persecution, that doesn't apply? Why not? Because if we understand that logic, that's going to make a big impact to the situation today.
Are they less motivated to capture people at a time of destruction?
You think so? The way I've heard it is explained is that you're not helping anything. They're out to kill and destroy and persecute anyways. So we're going to say we're not going to pay for this captive because we don't want to encourage them to take more captives. What do you mean? They're on a rampage. They're destroying the temple. They're killing people. There's a Ramban that spells this out a little more than I include in here. But I mean, they took like the whole Jewish people in captivity. Al Naharas Bavel, Sham Yashav Nugam, they're all going out in chains. So what are you accomplishing by not paying too much, right? So that's Tosfos' other answer for why this rule wouldn't apply in a time of destruction and persecution. So
another one too.
Yeah.
I could have $10 billion in the bank, but the Romans are going to take it all anyway, so I might as well give them And just to capture it.
Uh-huh.
Would you
You're saying that would even,
Don't tell anyone.
yeah.
If I kidnap you.
I think what you're filling in is why Tosfos is saying that Tosfos only talks about why the second reason of the Gemara wouldn't apply here. I think what you're filling in is why even the first reason wouldn't apply either. It might be mashma from this Tosfos that he understands the second reason is really the Iker reason, and that's what we'll see in the Shulchan Aruch. But so let's see how the Shulchan Aruch rules on this. And so the points open so far before we see the Shulchan Aruch is, A, what's the reason for the takana? Is it not impoverishing the community, or is it not to encourage future kidnappings? And also, which of Tosfos' exceptions does he incorporate? So which reason did the Shulchan Aruch rule like? He says captives are not to be ransomed at an unreasonable cost because of Tikkun Olam. And he adds in, so that the enemies don't try to take more captives. So which reason did he rule like? Second reason. So how did he know that? The Gemara never answered the question. How did the Shulchan Aruch know that the second reason was the main reason? That's where we brought the Bir Agra, the Vilna Gaon, right? The Bir Agra is hard to understand. He writes in very terse language, but it's a deep point, and the italics are the way I understood the Bir Agra. I think what he's saying, I'll just say it in my own words, is that we saw that there's an argument in Kesubos, right? The first opinion was that a husband has to pay even 10 times for his wife. The second opinion is that that he's not allowed to. So if the only problem, if the only problem was impoverishing the community, then if a husband pays for his wife, is the community impoverished by that? No. So everyone would say that a husband has to pay for his wife. The fact that the Gra says, Midipligi b'ksubos, from the fact that there's an argument in Kesubos, meaning from the fact that there's an opinion that Rav Shimon Gamliel says a husband can't pay too much for his wife, it has to be there's a problem of encouraging future kidnappings. If the only problem was impoverishing the community, why would Rav Shimon Gamliel say that a husband can't pay for his wife? That's what I think the Vilna Gaon.
Is there a distinction between the first time she's captured and the second? Because if one said she's captured a second time,
then he doesn't have to, but he's still allowed to. He's still allowed to. Right. So the first, let's just clarify something. So the first opinion there that he has to pay the first time and has an option to the second time understands that the halacha didn't apply for that's the Tosfos. The halacha didn't apply to a person's wife and not for a person for themselves. That's the first opinion. Rav Shimon Gamliel just doesn't hold that there's an exception for a person himself and his wife. But from the fact that the Vilna Gaon's points from the fact that Rav Shimon Gamliel argues and says that he's not allowed to even for his wife, there has to be a problem of encouraging them to do it again. If the only problem was bringing the community to poverty, then a husband would have to pay for his wife because you're not bringing the community to poverty. So that's the Vilna Gaon's explanation for why the Shulchan Aruch was felt that ruled according to the second reason. Yeah.
They couldn't bring this price up as a proof one of the two.
Right.
If
Yeah.
the price is clear one way,
yeah,
like the second opinion, so the Gemara and Gittin had a Yibailahu. What's the reason? So I would have said Tanur Abundant, like the Vilna Gaon. From the fact that they argued over here, it must be like the second reason. Kind of the first reason. Maybe the Gemara didn't know the price.
that's fair though.
Interesting.
I remember thinking about that. That's a good point. What he's saying is that why didn't the Gemara bring this as a proof? So as for why, I don't know. So what does that mean for us if it's the second reason over the first reason in terms of modern day prisoner swaps? What do we say? That if the problem is impoverishing the community, what would we say about prisoner swaps? Is there a problem or not? No. But if it's encouraging them to do it again, maybe there's a problem. That's why it makes a big difference. The Shulchan Aruch ruled like the second reason for us. So that's number one. Number two, which exceptions of Tosfos does he incorporate? Does he incorporate that the Tosfos' idea that this doesn't apply to a person for themselves or their wife?
He says, looking at an answer.
Well, he says a person has to pay for himself. Even that's Tosfos. It can pay for himself, right? Even that's Tosfos. That's part of his idea. So he says that. Talmud Chacham, does he mention that? He says there's an exception to Talmud Chacham. And what about Shas Korban? He leaves it out, right? So that would have helped us a lot, right? Right? Because that's probably the easiest exception to apply to our case. The same way over there, Tosfos says, what's the problem of paying for a captive because they're going to want to do it again? They were persecuting, killing, kidnapping. You're not helping anything. Like, what are you accomplishing by not paying for a captive? So there's a strong argument, I think, to say the same thing nowadays. What are you accomplishing by not agreeing to their exchanges? Anyways, they want to kill people and take captives. So that would have been maybe the easiest of Tosfos' exceptions to apply to the modern day situation. The Shulchan Aruch leaves it out. So in terms of the timing of this, is helps because in Silver Spring, which is where I studied for many years, not many years, whatever, few years. They just did a similar community learning event about this, and I got to listen to Rav Lopiansky, my old Rosh Yeshiva, talk about it. And I just got to talk to Rabbi Reingold, my Rosh Kol, on the phone about a couple of questions I had about it. So I'll try to summarize some of what Rav Lopiansky said about this. One of the questions we had is that what's the Mishnah talking about? It's talking about when the captors want money or they want prisoners in exchange. So when they want money in exchange. So even though it seems like since the reason comes out that there's a problem of encouraging them to do it again, would we still say any type of chiluk, would we still say there's a difference between the situation nowadays or not? So what Rav Lopiansky wanted to say is that what the Mishnah is talking about is you have a group of people, bandits, pirates, whatever, and they want to start a profitable business enterprise. So they're thinking about what's more profitable to do. Should we kidnap people or should we smuggle drugs? Should we do something else? So then the Mishnah comes along and says, don't pay too much because then they're going to want to kidnap more and more people. Nowadays, a group like Hamas, they're out to kill. Like they want to destroy, they want to exterminate Jews, they want to destroy Israel. So if we say that we're not going to pay too much for ransom, we're not going to give up too many terrorists for ransom, you're not really changing anything. There's still that was one of his arguments for why the Takana of the Mishnah wouldn't apply to a prisoner swap. His second argument is that even if you say that it does apply to a prisoner swap, you still have the exception of Tosfos that a time of persecution is different. That the same way during the Roman persecution, Tosfos says that the rule didn't apply because what are you accomplishing by not encouraging them to take more people? So same thing nowadays. What are you accomplishing by not redeeming the captives? They're still going to want to, and if they don't take captives, they'll just kill people instead. So I asked Rabbi Reingold about this. So he says that you can use it as a tziruf, basically, with other things. That it wouldn't stand, meaning that exception of Tosfos, that's not a reason by itself to permit redeeming the hostages, but in combination, that's in halacha sometimes we'll have an idea where, like this is an example, that wasn't brought in the Shulchan Aruch, but in combination with other factors, you can use it to, it's like if my kid asks me for dessert, and I say, you need to have 5 pieces of chicken. And they say, well, I only had 2 pieces of chicken, so that's not enough for dessert. But I also had potato, and I had some beef, I had some vegetables. So when you combine all those together, okay, then the 2 pieces of chicken joins with everything else, and that gets them their dessert. So Tosfos' exception of not, that this doesn't apply to time persecution, the Shulchan Aruch didn't bring that down. So it's not good enough by itself, but in combination with other factors, he felt that that was a reason to say that it's okay. And really the biggest reason he felt that it was permitted is because we're dealing with a whole different parsha now of war. And that was the last few sources at the end were about how that the halachas in a time of war are just totally different. And the Shulchan, and all of this whole sugya about redeeming captives is not talking about when there's a war happening. And so the example that's here, just to show it, for example, how wartime is different, is that normally we say that, let's say there's a building on fire, and I know there's someone in the building. I'm not a trained firefighter, and if I go in to try to save someone, I'm going to risk my life, but they're definitely going to die if I don't try to save them. Or someone's drowning, and I'm not a great swimmer. They're definitely going to drown, Am I required to risk my life to save someone else's life? So there's a concept of chayecha kodmin, your life comes first. And the Mishnah Berurah comes out that applies even when it's just a doubt. Even if it's only a doubt that I'm gonna put my life in peril, I'm still not required to put my life in peril to save someone else. So that's one point. I think you're allowed to. He says, "Eina mechuyev dechayav kodem v'chayei chaveru." So I think he just says you're not obligated to, but you're allowed to. Right? I mean, the question comes up with organ donations, another timely topic. Oh yeah, that's that. Okay.
How likely are you to, if you're a really good swimmer with life-saving skills, then maybe you're more obligated.
For sure, there's different levels of doubt, right? Yeah, that's why I said if I'm not a good swimmer, I'm not a firefighter. Yeah.
Stories of people going to save somebody who's themselves.
Right. Yeah. Right. So that's the idea that you're not obligated to do that. Yet we still see that when there's a time of war, not only are people required to risk their lives to go fight, but they're even compelled to. The Torah says that people who normally are exempted from going to war, there's a list of people in, I think it's Parsha Shoftim or Kiseitse. Okay. That they are. That they're exempted from going to war. Someone who's newly married, someone who just planted a vineyard, someone who just built a house, they don't go to war, they go home. But in a Milchemes mitzvah, the Mishnah in Sota says they have to go. What do you mean? Chayecha kodmin. Your life comes first. I'm not required to risk my life. So we see already that a wartime is different, and there's a lot of poskim that talk about this idea. The one I brought is that Sitz Eliezer, who says this idea that during the time of Muhammad, we don't apply this idea of chayecha kodem. So what Rav Lopiansky, what I listened to him saying is that during a war, it's just a whole different ballgame. Just it's a totally different set of rules. And if the normal course of action in a war is get the hostages out, then that's what the halacha would be. So that was his main point for why he felt that it was permissible to do these prisoner swaps. So just in summary, that was the main point. Just the war.
What about
Putting people in danger?
Right, but the problem is that when you release all the prisoners, they then bring more danger to the community, so does that fall into the same?
I'm really happy you mentioned that. So I wanted to bring a historical footnote about that. So people are familiar with the story of Entebbe in Uganda in the 1970s, right? Right, so the hostage rescue operation. So what a lot of people don't know, I just found out about this last week. Rabbi Reingold talked about it. Apparently, it's in Rebbe it's a footnote in Rebbe Ovadia's Tshuva Sefer. I haven't seen it inside. That's what I heard. Is that the story for background is that there was a Israeli plane that was hijacked in the 1970s by Palestinian terrorists. They were holding Jewish hostages and demanding that Palestinian terrorist prisoners be released and exchanged hostages. They said we're going to kill the hostages. It ended up being there was a rescue operation. There was a casualty, a couple of casualties. But before that rescue operation, the prime minister and the governor at the time was Yitzhak Rabin. He asked a group of Rabbanim, of Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael. He asked Rav Ovadia Yosef and Rav Elyashiv and Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and there were several other Gedolim there. And they got together and they were all in a room and talking about this question, whether it's permitted to agree to release the terrorists and put the country in danger, like Ms. Spellman was saying, in order to save these people who are being held hostage. And they can't, just imagine the weight on their shoulders, by the way, that no matter what, the easiest thing to do is just say, I don't know, right? Because no matter what you say, you're not gonna say to release the hostages whose lives are in danger. Okay, but you're going to put all these terrorists out into the open and put people in. There's no right answer. So that they have to make a decision. That's a lot of weight on their shoulders. So they came out that there's a concept of halacha it's called ein safek motzi midei vadai. That it's implied in a lot of different contexts, but it basically means that a certainty outweighs a doubt. So one context is if two people come to court arguing over money, and one person says, this piece of property is definitely mine. And another person says, this property might be mine. I don't really know. then the person with who's certain has precedence. That concept over here means that the hostages are in a definite peril. Their lives are definitely, and that's what the Gemaras of the Rambam says, that it's a sakanas nefashos, as opposed to releasing terrorists is not definite. It's a suffix. They might. Rev Lopiansky added that there's unfortunately there's no shortage on the supply of terrorists over there, right? It's not you release these people. You don't release these people. They have plenty of other people over there, right? So and therefore the definite peril that the hostages are in outweighs the doubt of what the released terrorists might do. That's this ein safek motzi midei vadai. And so that was, they ruled to release the hostages. They didn't need to because they did the rescue operation, right? So it's interesting that the government asked the rabbis, right? That was a left-wing government at the time, which makes more interesting. Yeah, I don't know. There's a tshuva from Rav Moshe that someone asked him about a milchemes mitzvah, about going to war in general, and he writes in there that I have no reason to answer this question because the Israeli government would never ask me this. Like, I answer questions that people ask me, and this is just a theoretical. But this, it really happened that the government asked the rabbis. So I don't know if the government now is consulting rabbinic authority or not, but they came out with this idea that so your question about that you're putting people in danger when you release these people. That's what people argue nowadays. That one of the main terrorists they released from the Gilad Shalit deal, so a couple of decades ago. He was one of the main leaders of the October 7th attack. So how can we do this? That we're putting people in danger. So that's the Rabbanan apply this concept of ein. Seemingly this would apply. That would not be a reason to prohibit redeeming the hostage, releasing the prisoners. So having considered all of those factors, right, that it's only putting the prisoners out from jail, it's only a doubtful danger versus getting the hostages a definite danger outweighs it. And then the arguments that the Mishnah talking about money might not apply nowadays to prisoner swaps because it's not going to help to, they're not going to be not motivated to keep doing it. If they don't want to take captives, then they'll just kill people, right? And then also you have Tosfos' exception about a time of persecution being different, even though the Shulchan Aruch didn't bring that. L'halacha, when you add that to the mix, that's just another support for why at least in this approach, Rav Lopiansky felt that it would be permitted nowadays. I think there's other posts, there's poskim who argue and just take the Mishnah more at face value, that we don't pay too much and it's too much. So anyways, it's a very, very controversial and difficult topic, but hopefully we got some of the background of it and some of the different approaches. And the Hamas is out to kill Jews. And the fact that we happen to be in Portland and not in Israel, it's only we're at war the same way, just like everyone else is at war. The fact they didn't come after us is just happens to be that we're here and not there. All of us are really part of this war and at this war. And so hopefully getting involved in some of the Torah. Torah is the greatest protection. It's our greatest weapon, Torah and Tefillah, and we're part of the army. So hopefully getting involved in some of this will help the situation. We should see everyone come out of captivity very soon.